Good morning, everyone. We'd like to get started. Yeah. Good morning. It's great to see you all here. I think I think we've got a great day planned for you, so I'm really looking forward to participating in it with you. So I want to begin by introducing myself. I'm Kim Thomas. I'm a consultant with Strategies 2.0. And I also want to introduce Troy Nichols, who will be co-presenting with me, I guess we'll say, throughout the day, and Lana Calista, who makes all things work if they're electronic. I'm still in the Stone Age where I handwrite everything, and my grandchildren tell me I have to learn to text a little more often, but Lana's got it down. And then I also want to mention that we are connected live to our hub site, our remote site rather, in Fairfield. So we do have another group of people who are participating with us throughout the day in Fairfield at the government center there. And we also have additional people online joining with us. So throughout the day, we may stop and ask them to give us feedback on what they're seeing so far. So moving ahead. You've already noticed that there's snacks outside, breakfast type snacks outside the door here, and in Fairfield there should be, I know there was a little snag with Panera's today, but there should be some snacks for the morning there as well, and coffee and so forth. Okay, moving right along, I just want to say welcome to everybody. Welcome to the hub people, welcome to the satellite people, welcome to the online people, welcome to all of you. We're happy to see you. Again, I want to click forward to, oh gosh, that's the counties we're in and the computer. This is our mission. And Strategies is a collaborative partnership between the CAP Center, the Child Abuse Prevention Center, Children's Bureau, and San Diego State University Social Policy Institute. It's all funded by the California Department of Social Services, the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. So thank you to them. Our vision is a world with strong families and thriving communities. Our mission is to support family strengthening professionals to promote child, family, and community well-being. Strategies 2.0 provides training, technical assistance, and consultation to organizations in the family strengthening field, broadly speaking. I really want to underscore that all of Strategies services are free, thanks to the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. The training, consulting, and networking opportunities that are offered through Strategies are all free. So again, thank you to OCAP. There's ways that you can stay connected to us beyond just coming to these meetings, which we also want you to come to these meetings, of course. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can request or register for additional trainings. You can register for learning communities. So that's the way to stay connected. And once again, thank you to the Office of Child Abuse Prevention for making this all possible. Just quickly, here's the agenda. I think you all should have them. If anybody ended up without a packet, please let me know. We have a few extras over here on the table. I think we got one in front of every chair, but it's possible we missed, so let me know. Before I jump into the agenda, I want to take a minute to just say I've introduced our team, but I think it would be great if everyone just took a moment to introduce yourselves to the other people at your table, so that we start that networking right from the very beginning. So I'm just going to give you, like, I don't know, 30 seconds. Introduce yourselves quickly to the other people in your room, at your table. In Fairfield too. Oh, is it good? Yeah, so then they're up there. So then... Okay, everyone, let's pull it back together. Let's pull it back together. Hello. I lost it. Hello. Hello. I know you guys are all really excited to meet each other. We have a presentation to get to. Thanks so much. I just wanted to say hi to the people in Fairfield. There they are online. Hi. And they're all introducing themselves to each other too. So good morning to Fairfield.
Good morning.
Okay, so then to recap, do you have what you need? To recap, the agenda is in front of you. This morning, we're going to take a minute to recap what we've done for the first, basically a little over a year of these strategies events, and then go into a pair sharing activity that that Troy will lead us through, and then we will do a discussion of some regional data and a presentation, and then some discussion of a regional data. Then we will have lunch, which is provided to us through the generosity of First 5 Sacramento. I thank you very much. Yay! And then after lunch, you know, when we all have our maximum energy, we will be jumping into a resiliency and planning activity that I guarantee you will be exciting because Troy's handling that, and all he does is always exciting. So, okay, just to the slides. To recap where we've been so far, in March of 2017, a little over a year ago, we had in the Capital Region, we had our first Learning Community Cafe. I think there's a few of you who were here even then. So at that first regional cafe, we went through a whole process of having conversations around the table, guided conversations about what it is that we most wanted to do with this opportunity to have a learning circle or learning community sponsored by OCAP through Strategies. So went through a whole process on that, and two of the top outcomes that we came out of that meeting with were to focus more on parent and community engagement and to focus more on greater involvement in public policy. In fact, I remember one of the comments from one of the participants about public policy, as she put it, was, we need to get better at making our voices heard by policymakers. So that was what we came out of that meeting with. So that guided to a large extent what we have been doing for the last year. In October, we had a nuts and bolts of successful family and community engagement. We had a fantastic panel of people who had been very successful in those efforts in different ways, different models, and learned a lot from people who were experienced, who were part of our own community. So that was a really interesting thing. We learned better about the various approaches to parenting and community engagement, and we left with concrete ideas for improving engagement at home. And we also had that huge opportunity that runs throughout this, which is just simply to have the opportunity to connect with each other, to find out what's going on in a county, a couple of counties over from you, maybe a little bigger, maybe a little smaller, but it ends up we all seem to be facing common issues. So that was a great opportunity just to connect. In February, we deviated a little bit because so many of our counties had been going through disasters. I mean, there's no other word for it. Fires, floods, the almost collapse of the dam that had, I think, over 100,000 people evacuated. You probably all remember that. So we took time out from our regular schedule, if you want to put it that way, to learn from an expert how we can prepare ourselves to respond to disasters at an individual level, but primarily at an organizational level and at a community level. So we learned about natural disaster risks in our community, throughout the capital region. We also learned about how we can assure the safety of staff and clients, how to protect the sustainability of the organization, and how to connect with others in the region. And I remember one of the things that was pointed out is that most small business and local nonprofits included do not survive after an episode like that. They're not able to sustain themselves, and the way to make sure that the organization is sustainable in a situation like that is to have planned in advance. Sorry. I'll make sure I turn that off in a second. And then finally, we also went directly into the advocacy issue, heard from wonderful speakers, including an attorney who specializes in that area of how nonprofits can be involved in advocacy legally, a wonderful retired lawmaker from the state capitol who told us a lot about how what's really going on behind the scenes and how we can really make our message have impact, and other kinds of advocacy approaches that we could use. Also some information on current legislation that was happening in Sacramento. And then, of course, we have today. Oh, gosh, I forgot to forward. Here we are. Today being creating change for our families. Creating the change our families need most, and strategizing for a region-wide impact. So that's our agenda for today. So we're off to an auspicious beginning. I think we've covered really interesting topics. We've had good participation. I'm looking forward to us having a really invigorating discussion and decision-making process today, and an exciting year ahead. Troy, I know you wanted to go into the advocacy issues a little bit more, so it's all yours.
Good morning. We can do a little better than that. I do this every single time. If you've been in the room with me before, you might as well just say it loud the first time so we don't have to do this every time. Good morning. All right, because we need energy today. Excuse me. One of the things that we're going to do, as was mentioned and Kim went into, is we're going to plan. We got some power hitters in the room. We've got some folks that are doing this work. We've got some folks that are decision makers. So the hope is that what OCAP has afforded us to do in these learning communities, we can begin to take shape today. We can begin to look at the next year, the next 4 learning communities, because you're going to hear me say this over and over again. This is not a training. And I think sometimes we mix that up because Strategies does training, right? But that's not this. This is your day, not my day. I'm just here to facilitate it and kind of push you along. The hope is that we're going to pull on some ideas, some needs that we have, and utilize this time as a think tank going forward. So what you're going to promise me is, A, you're going to come back. But B, you're going to do some work in between. Like, I've already had 3 or 4 people come up to me. Natalie and I see each other way too much. So we're going to continue to do the work between these meetings. That's our expectation of you, is to find someone in this room that you can continue to do this work with in between the meetings. And then you utilize strategies for the trainings to support that, to help implementation, to help develop those things. Nod. That's what we're going to do. That's what today's going to look like, all right? And we're going to dive into some data to support that. And then we're going to ask what we're already doing. And then we're going to talk about the needs, all right? So before we do that, what is advocacy? However, listen, I got through school on cheat sheets. So if the cheat sheet helps, if that's where you want to go, that's perfect. Okay. Now, give me more. Supporting them. Okay. Being a voice for those that may not have a voice, definitely. Anyone else? I'll come back to you.
I think another part of it is not just being a voice or speaking out, but making sure that those things that you say are directed to people who can make a difference. Either by joining you as a coalition to have build more voices, or for decision makers and policy makers who can make change and implement what you're advocating for.
So we're making our ask in the right place, definitely. You have one here.
So you're either, as an advocate, you're either asking for additional attention to an issue so that more people are aware that it is an issue, or you're asking for resources to be able to address the issue.
Resources and attention, I like. No. So it's that whole concept of limiting that codependency piece. We want some level of dependency while we're teaching and coaching, but then we want to be able to separate so that you can do two things in my mind. Go do it on your own and then teach someone else to do it. Because I think that's real important with our parent partners and our constituent engagement and all of those sorts of things. So yes, very simply put, advocacy is speaking out on behalf of someone or something. That's why I asked you to go deeper, because it is really just this simple. Comment?
Fairfield? Go to Fairfield, please.
Definitely. We're doing that next. So, Fairfield, do you have anything that you would like to add, or our online folks?
So that is something that I was kind of thinking, that it is, it's still contract. It's one of those things where you have to make that decision for yourself, which is also a good thing to feel it out and, do it just on the side for a little while, because it will probably always be contract work that nobody, our county's so small that people don't have the money to bring us in as employees, because you basically add on for them, and that has $30,000 additional cost to make us employees, because of all the benefits.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part? We had some feedback. Okay, can you repeat that last part? We had a little bit of feedback, a little bit of sound trouble. Did we have anybody that had any comments online? Okay.
Okay, can you hear us now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, so we were saying a couple of answers. One was that it's standing up for someone who lacks the capacity to stand up for themselves. And then Erica, you had one?
Fighting for somebody's rights.
Right, did you hear that last one?
Go ahead, can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Fighting for an individual's rights.
No doubt. So fighting for rights as well as standing up. I like that one, both of those together, standing up for those who may not be able to stand up for themselves. That's part of that teaching component. So real important aspects to this whole process. One of the largest things is does it make a difference? Does advocacy make a difference? How?
Just can't see it, right?
It gets the point.
Policy change. Much larger impact than one-on-one. Okay. What else?
It gets the point across.
So did you hear that?
So here, Fairfield, here's how we're going to work this. What I'll do is when I ask a question initially, it'll be for the hub. And then what I'll do is I'll go to our Fairfield site for you to give feedback in, and then I'll go to our online. So you'd like them to chat their responses in? Okay. So the preference with some of the sound concerns is if you guys could chat your your questions or comments in, if that's okay. Okay. And what I'll do in this section is I'll just repeat what people say, and then we'll do that next because we're kind of popcorning. So with that, can you repeat what you said for me? So awareness and motivation. It brings awareness. It raises awareness to issues that may not be on the radar of the folks that we need it to, and it could motivate people to become involved, without a doubt. How else does it make a difference? So some unlikely partners could potentially come together due to advocacy, without a doubt. Anyone else? Creates value, creates respect, creates trust. Someone's got your back. Sounds like this is kind of a trauma-informed approach. Advocacy can kind of bring us into those aspects of trauma-informed care. So you're going to hear me weave a whole lot of themes together. Most of them, if not all of them, shameless plug, Strategies also has full-day trainings for. But a big piece to this is realizing that this stuff overlaps and we have to be aware of it in order to implement it the best. So yes, it does definitely make a difference. And our constituents are an important aspect of it. I tell people often I do this work because of my mistakes. I've been in this field about 28 years, and I started when I was 4. And I realized I don't think I had any fatal mistakes, but I did miss some opportunities. And one of them that I missed is my constituents, the folks that I was working for, my parent partners. And I've learned probably over the past decade and a half that that is my most valuable resource in this. My most valuable resource is to bring somebody in that knows it better than I do. I think back to when I was most successful, it was when a foster youth would tell me, you know nothing about how I've grown up. Because he knew that I came from a 2-parent family. I drove a car to see him every day. I played lacrosse. Right? Took a minute for that to sink in, but yeah. So being a partner with that young man to better understand the life of a foster care youth became paramount to my advocacy. It became paramount for me to understand, because if I was advocating for him to go to college and he's just advocating to eat tomorrow, we're not on the same page. So that's where advocacy falls with regards to our constituents being involved. Advocacy versus lobbying, what's the difference? I'm not going to keep looking at you because I know you have the answers. You can wait. I'm not going to keep looking at you. I keep looking for you to bail me out, but just give it a second and then I'll look at you a third time. What do we have in the back? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No doubt. You mind if I add something to that? I would add in the lobbying piece that it has to do often with legislation, or it also has to do with some sort of policy that may have legislation behind it or supporting it. But yes, we're talking about advocacy is community-based or individual-based, and it has to do with access to resources and change. And it can be policy-based, but when we're talking about lobbying, we're talking about making sure that we are paying attention to the decisions that are being made by political leadership, by leadership at agency levels, and things of that nature. You want to add something? Go ahead. Gotcha. So specific to certain legislation that has certain numbers and letters attached to it, as well as the importance of stepping out of the advocacy into the lobbying realm. See, I'm only as good as my team. You had something to add? Mm. No doubt. No doubt. And the important distinction, that unfortunately lobbyists get a bad rap, and get at times aren't seen as someone that's advocating for something positive, but we know that they are. And we are here to dispel that in many ways as well. You had a comment? Mm-hmm. No doubt. So I think the specificity of it becomes an important aspect. Okay. So let's do that, definitely. I appreciate that. Thank you, Fairfield, for jumping in. Like I said, I'm only as good as my team. Real important. So what we were talking about in that particular case, Fairfield, this will be the last time that I paraphrase, and then we'll get them directly from the participants. We were talking about that it's specific not only to going to that particular legislative branch or to that congressman, but it's also when someone comes and talks to you individually as a voter about a particular law or policy or something that you can have the effect on as a voter. Do you agree? All right. So advocacy. I want you to keep that in mind throughout the day, because what we're going to work on and come up with on a global perspective, so more general, and then we'll have specific subsets. What are we here to advocate for? Strategies 2.0, along with the support of OCAP, has the opportunity to help us in our advocacy efforts through our learning community. How do we do that? And you have the chance to help drive that. And that's what I need you to think about throughout the day. All right? Nod. Cool. Nod, Fairfield, and online. I see you. So here's the next thing. Here's what I want you to do. You're going to find somebody you don't know. You're going to find somebody in the room that you don't know. And you're going to discuss with them the following. Through the lens of the work that you do. So what brought you here today? You saw the flyer. You saw Strategies 2.0. Thank you for coming because my name was on the flyer and you came anyway. But what brought you here today? I want you to think through that lens. And I want you to talk about what are the advocacy efforts you'd like to explore, or areas in our community that require more advocacy efforts. And what we'll do as a group is I have the feeling they'll funnel into a few categories that we can begin to address. So when I tell you to, you're going to rise up. Fairfield, if you have enough folks to pair up, or you can do it as a group, because then we're going to ask you to report out. And in the report out, I'm going to take some notes. Online folks, if you would like to chat with one another or just feed your information into our chat with regards to, with the work that you do, what are some advocacy efforts you'd like to explore or that need more attention? Can we do that? All right. So stand up, go find somebody, start the discussion, and then you will be asked to report out. You will be asked to report out. first person has talked, the second person should be talking, or you should be having some sort of dialogue about everything. You could start to wrap up your conversations. Fairfield online. All right. So what I'd like you to do is either stay with your partner or make sure that when your partner and you give your feedback, if you're at separate tables, you just make us aware of that. So here's what we want to do. We want to harvest this information. And what I'm assuming is there may be some similarity. So once we get an idea down, if you have to add to it, do so. Or if it's a subgroup to one that's already there, you can say that as well. All right. But we want to harvest these ideas. And I'm thinking because of some of the things that I know are going on in our community that there may be some similarities. So here's the bad news. Everybody's got to report out. Don't have a choice. If I got to stand up here and talk, you got to talk back to me. All right? So who wants to go first? Start in the back, and then I'll come up front.
So will you wait for the microphone before you speak so the other room can hear you?
Definitely.
Was that you?
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll just pass around. I'll pass around the microphone to my group. Oh, I think, can you hear me? Oh, hello. one of the things that we thought that would be really wonderful to increase advocacy is housing and homeless issue here, especially in Sacramento. There's a lot that's being done around it, but I think we could always use some more advocacy.
And regarding homelessness and housing, also in Placer County, not only advocating for the means to help people get into homes or stay in homes, but also to have builders or contractors build homes instead of just pay into that big fund that never goes anywhere. And then we also talked a little bit about dental and other health access issues, both in Placer and Sacramento County, as well as psychiatry and bridging that gap.
Hi, I'm Stacey Kennedy with Sacramento County Public Health, MCAH programs, and we also discussed the perinatal mood disorder, postpartum depression issue, that we just don't have enough services for mothers. We need some increased advocacy there as well.
I'm sorry, can you give me that again?
It's perinatal mood disorder.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And this is kind of bundle all of that up. There can never be enough advocacy on the value of prevention, whether it be health prevention, child abuse prevention, whatever that looks like, and not just necessarily at the legislative level, but even at the service provider and particularly at the parent level, where you kind of walk the gamut of education / advocacy.
Okay.
So we'll say ditto to everything you said. We touched on all those. And I would say the one thing we added in there was we said all of these issues tie into the whole ACEs conversation, adverse childhood experiences. And the adverse childhood experiences needs to very much be anchored in the message of resiliency, and that there is hope. So that would be our addition.
The only thing I would add was around homelessness, we particularly emphasized advocacy for children, children who are homeless, infants and toddlers.
Okay.
I will come get. Thank you.
Sure. Mike Mason from Kids First in Placer County, advocating for children, of course, but through involved fatherhood. The absentee or lightly involved fathers need to understand their responsibilities. And on the other end of the spectrum, the fathers that want involvement or being held from that need to know what their rights are.
Latina Price with First Life Sacramento, and I also dittoed what Stephanie said in regards to prevention and early intervention strategies and funding, and also about ACEs and advocating for more trauma-informed approaches.
Julie Delello with First Five Sacramento, and my partner and I really just focused on childcare and the need for from infant all the way up to 13, and that there is an ask right now with the governor for $1 billion for babies. And it's a bit of a misnomer, because what I learned is it's actually $1 billion for 0 to 13. So, but that's great too.
Lisa Carr with SETA Head Start and Early Head Start. And we talked about much of what was up there. We also, because we both I run home visiting programs also, we also talked about not only the homelessness, but the mental health issues that so many of our homeless families are working with, and needing access to mental health, and access to mental health, and then dealing with their infants and toddlers and their 3 to 5 year olds, and that cycle continues. And then also looking at even our center-based families, that they're just one step away from being where they were and homeless before when they lose their transportation, especially in Sacramento. We have a horrible transportation system. And, you know, the minute their car breaks down, 12 things go wrong. So we talked about that. And we both also deal with the immigrant and especially the illegal immigrants and trying to access medical care for those families, the adults, and the continued drug problem that we both see in those families.
Yeah, hi. Karen Woods, Harmony Health Medical Center and Family Resource Center. I manage a home visitation program. So yeah, just to back on with what Lisa said, that's the issue that we run into a lot is just the services for the immigrants that we service. A lot of them can't qualify for, you know, like WIC or food stamps or whatever it is because of their citizenship status. So really just advocating for them and letting them know that we're there for them, because a lot of them, they feel like everyone's against them. So if we can be that one person that's there for them to assist them in any way and to empower them, because the resources are out there, but they're just not aware of it. So really providing that information for them as well.
I'm County Ying from Harmony Health Medical Clinic and Family Resources. We had discussed about advocacy for homelessness, childcare, let's see, yeah, and pretty much also mental health. It's a really big issue that we have. We do have a behavioral health center located at our medical clinic and resource center, so definitely that's something that we want to emphasize and also get rid of the stigma of providing that resources to our community.
Hi, Terry Cedric with Lake and Mendocino counties. I work for an agency called North Coast Opportunities. I work with children, and my partner and I talked about childcare a lot, but also with all the fires that have happened in the last 3 years in Lake County, and now the last one last year in Mendocino County, our agency, being the Community Action Agency, has dealt a lot with that. And so we deal with everything from food insecurities to homelessness to you name it, we do it. And I hear what everybody's saying, and the mental health issues that go along with all of it is just amazing. And to have more money focused towards that would be great.
Were you underscoring things? Was there anything that I don't have up here that you had on your list? Any check marks you want me to add that are top of your list? Because I'm kind of putting check marks next to the ones that people have repeated.
I guess that I have to say, by looking in Lake and Mendocino County right now, we need to look at housing and homelessness. It's a huge, you've got to have the basics met before you can move on with anything else.
Thank you.
I'm Brandy Perry from NCO Rural Committees Child Care in Lake and Mendocino County. And everything that we spoke about has already been up there, so I'd like to check again for child care and affordable housing, mental health, and homelessness. And I have to say that it's interesting to hear Terry was not my partner in this activity, but said the same thing that I was thinking. So I think we're on the same page here.
Let's go next.
Any new ones?
I'm Amanda from the Sacramento Children's Home, and something that we touched on was the effort with the school collaborative, and working with the schools and parents. Of course, you know, it's depending on the school itself, but supporting parents and giving them a voice so that they can meet their children's needs at school.
Hello, my name is Ann Jeanette Jones from Sac County Office of Education, and one of the things that I wanted to focus on was advocating for equity and quality within childcare, and not only childcare but education. Period. Children are children, regardless of your
parents' socioeconomic, and so they should all have the ability to attend a quality school, a quality program. The other thing was we talked about trauma informed for our children, but also us as adults. So a lot of us as adults, parents, teachers, have trauma as well that we haven't dealt with. And so when we're working with our children, there's some issues and things that come up with that as well. So we need to address that for ourselves.
Hi, my name is Amalia Saavedra, and I'm from Community Resource Project WIC. I wanted to put another check mark on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, because that's something that I guess you need specialized education to be able to assist in that area of mental health, and there's so little access for women to get help for that. The other thing that I talked about with my partner was what I do in my job is to really encourage and bring support and education for breastfeeding, especially in low-income communities, especially in the African American community, where they have the lowest breastfeeding rate and the highest infant mortality rate, because breastfeeding can really help not only with the health and well-being of the children and lower infant mortality, but also for the health and well-being of the mother and society as a whole.
So I'm Erin Alec DiMolanta. I work with Center Yuba Behavioral Health, and I advocate for adult probationers. I just wanted to highlight the trauma-informed, especially around, I work in probation, so we're trying to increase the trauma-informed organizational platform as a whole across our community. It's kind of a buzzword in our community right now, but I feel like we're just kind of disconnected in a lot of our different organizations. So we're advocating for that. And then also within our juvenile probation population.
We talked a lot about ACEs, so definitely want to add another check mark there, and really want to echo the prevention and education and advocacy. But in particular, what we talked about was moving away from a clinical model to thinking about a community model for prevention. And so I don't know if that is captured under prevention or just what, but the goal being that when we start talking about, childhood trauma and adverse, childhood experiences, adverse community experiences, that the thing we're asking for is not just more mental health professionals, but it's around how we structure our organizations and the institutions that people interface with so that they're much better able to address what's happening. And a lot of that does not happen one-on-one, but it happens when we create community safety. And so really just wanting to make sure that was called out.
I want to add that we wanted to move not only a clinical model, but move away from a medical model so that the solution for ACEs is not necessarily more antidepressants, but actually effective interventions for health.
Should I go? Yes. I'm Lisa Litt. I'm also with Yuba County Probation. I work with Erin. I'm a researcher. And one of the things that I would like to advocate for, we know that our children and our adult clients have profound, pervasive backgrounds of extensive trauma. And so, unfortunately, in the criminal justice world, there's a huge emphasis currently on labeling behaviors as antisocial. And what I would like to start to see is a modification of language to identify a lot of these behaviors as trauma-based rather than antisocial, because I think that would change the way that people look at them, the way that the officers interact with them, the way the community interacts with them. So just the way behaviors are labeled from antisocial to trauma-based.
Okay. Stacey Anderson with Pro Youth and Families. And just two quick things. One is, I know that there was a mentioning of drug and alcohol,
prevention, treatment, all of that, we left, it's not on that list at all. The drug and alcohol component and under prevention, we just desperately need that and really need some high quality drug treatment programs. And then the other thing is really being able to create safer spaces on campuses, school campuses for these kids.
Alejandra Labrado with First Five Sacramento. And we talked about hunger and advocating to address issues to prevent hunger in communities. We also talked about more community involvement and empowerment. In the more stronger and resilient communities are the healthier and happier children will be. So
Hello, I'm Yasmin. I'm from the Yolo Food Bank. I'm the program coordinator. And we talked about hunger and community involvement. And I would also like to check off housing and homelessness because I know that is a rising for our community.
So my group talked about two things, and I think they're sort of up there. One is just resources and access to concrete supports, including housing, but not limited to housing. So making sure that, and I know hunger goes in, I mean, we've touched on a lot of them, but just concrete supports in general. And then advocating on behalf of children in helping parents have knowledge and skills that they need to parent well. So I think it's sort of different than the schools and parents.
Say that one again, I'm sorry.
So advocating on behalf of children to give parents education and skills so that they can parent effectively.
Hi, my name is Berta Perez Sanchez. I'm with Richard Heath and Associates. I'm the outreach coordinator for the PG&E Energy Savings Assistance Program. And a couple of things that I think are important to maybe advocate a little bit more is on, and you have it there, ACEs, but more so tapping into the school systems. I know late last year I was having a conversation with a superintendent from a local school in the county that I reside, and he was not aware about ACEs at all. So I make sure that I provided that resources, and I think as a superintendent and even as, you know, school teachers having the interaction with children on a daily basis, it's very important for teachers and those that are educating our children to be aware of what ACEs is, so that in return they can provide a better approach in how they're teaching different children depending on where they're at, depending on the trauma that they suffer, interrelated with bullying in there. And so I think it's all interrelated, so I think ACEs will be one of those. And obviously creating more awareness, not only about all those different topics that we touch up on, but as various community entities help one another so that we can leverage those efforts.
Definitely. So what we're going to do for the sake of time is, if we have not touched someone, we're going to put them up there because we're going to further harvest these in the afternoon. So what we would like to do is to go to Fairfield and see if they had anything they wanted to add to our list.
Hi. So my name is Arthur Camargo. I'm with Team Fairfield is Awesome. So what we went with, we touched on mental health, but in our county, our crisis line is kind of hard to navigate. So we would advocate to streamline that, especially for people in crisis. We also wanted to advocate for having a mental health professional working with the police to respond on calls. Right now, police are the primary responders when people are in mental health crisis. So we wanted to make that pairing. We also touched on homelessness. We have a bunch of checks there from what you all spoke on. One of the main things for us is, of course, the language diversity, as well as the barriers that are presented both culturally and linguistically. And then we also have a lot of families here who are struggling with basic needs. So that's food and shelter. how can parents focus on actually parenting when they're struggling to find food or even a place to sleep or stay. Poverty was a big thing that I don't know any that we heard anyone else touch on that. So maybe advocating for more workforce opportunities, more training opportunities for different kinds of fields. And then, of course, we wanted, and this is for first five folks, more funding for family resource centers, which are the safety net for a lot of these folks who are struggling with basic needs. We also wanted to advocate for having more resources for kids who are in crisis, who maybe don't have a parent around to navigate, or maybe they have parents, but their parents or parental figures don't know how to navigate the system to access mental health care. In many cases, even the schools don't identify when a mental health crisis is in process. So we wanted to advocate for more of that. And of course, more homeless day centers and services, especially in times of extreme weather like today, where it's 100 degrees here. Where they're able to shower and get clean. Yeah, and of course, they would be able to take care of their basic hygiene needs. And subsidized childcare and other family resources to help out with some of those other basic needs. You know, people have to work, or maybe it's just one parental figure who has a job, and rather than leave their child by themselves, right? And in many cases, people are working just to pay for childcare. So maybe some subsidized care for helping those folks out. Did I miss anything?
All right, thank you, Arthur. If anything else comes up, please chat it in, because again, what we're going to do is start to see if there are any overarching themes that we can begin to focus on around our advocacy efforts. I think we're starting to see some, but we're going to dialogue about this further. Or is there anyone online that has to add or would like to add to this list? So no online folks, so definitely. So what we're going to do is we're going to hang these up and address these. We're going to come back to them later, because we're going to add some information to this. We're going to add some information about some of the data that goes along with our counties in our particular region. And then we're going to start to, towards the end of the day, harvest how we go about this advocacy process. So what I'd like to do right now is I do bleary-eyed breaks. You guys are looking a little bleary-eyed. So what we'll do is we'll do the full debrief after this. So let's take, can we do 15? It's 10:05. Can we come back? It's 11:05. Can we come back at 11:20? Promptly at 11:20. Take 15. To hang these up. And if you could just put push pins in them. No. Yep. Yes. All right, welcome back. So from what we've seen, and I know I'm all over the place with some of my handwriting up there, so I'll help you decode. What are some of the common themes? Because we have some really specific things there, but then we also have some overarching. And remember I said we're going to come up with some overarching objectives, and then we may have some subcategories to it. Little caveat. The unfortunate piece is we can't address them all. But we're not going to let any of them disappear. And what we hope to do is potentially find resources that can address some of them. We can take it as Strategies 2.0 and realize what the community needs are, compare these community needs to some of our other 5 learning communities that happen throughout the year as well. So we're not going to let anything fall off. So let me just give you kind of an idea of the hieroglyphics. So first we started out with housing and homeless, which has quite a few checks. We talked about the children that are affected by that. How do you get into housing? How do you stay into housing? And then there was an interesting comment about our builders, like this whole, when a housing development is put up, affordable housing has to be put up in the same area, those various things to be able to affect those situations. Is that what you were saying with that? Then we moved into healthcare access. Not only healthcare, but psychology, mental health. How do we streamline it? How do we make sure that our kids are taken care of in situations where either they're involved or challenged by mental health concerns, or their parents are and the effects that it has on them? The perinatal mood disorder, I want to add the male perspective there. Did not know that I probably myself had some level of postpartum depression for various reasons until 10 years after the birth. I went to a conference and was like, dudes go through this too? So I'd like to add a piece to that because it's real important to be aware of as far as relationships, community involvement around those sorts of things. ACEs, enough said, right? But resiliency, I think they kind of go hand in hand. Trauma-informed care, put all of those together. And whoever spoke on those was trying to steal my thunder. I got 2 or 3 slides. We're going to address those directly. So we'll talk about this. I have the feeling this might shake out with some subcategories. Our immigration issues and concerns, our prevention efforts around education and advocacy, and then we started talking about the community prevention efforts versus clinical and medical. I thought that was very interesting as well. Fatherhood involvement, child care, our transportation issues, our mental health with law enforcement officers. That's what that was about. Poverty, money for FRC. I kind of always give a caveat that this is a given in our field, that we're always looking for money. So it's a big piece, but it's a given. Kids in crisis, community beneficiaries, that voice and the disparity there was added to our list. We started talking about the safe spaces in schools and helping parents have their voice and choice. ACEs came back up during that conversation. Equity in child care in our schools, our concerns with advocacy for breastfeeding, the labeling of trauma behavior. We talked about that in some of our probation systems. Our drug and alcohol, hunger, concrete supports in times of need. Sorry, I've trained Strengthening Your Families too much, so that's that acronym, concrete supports in times of need. And we also talked about knowledge of parenting and child development. So what are the overarching themes? Because one of the things that came to mind for me was, are we talking about our approach to advocacy or our issues, or the things we want, the issues we want to advocate for? Because if we're talking about approach, then we're going to be talking about things like common language, common messaging, common practices. How do we approach that? But if we're talking about advocacy as far as the common issues, then there's some activities that go along with that. How do we advocate for a particular issue? So talk to me about that. What are the overarching? And are we talking about issue advocacy or the approach? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Because of this virtual life that we lead, We don't want to miss one tidbit of information. If you could just use the microphone, I appreciate it.
Sure. My name is Mark Fink. I'm with Yolo County Library. So one thing that came up during the break was if you talk about, if you just kind of talk to anybody and go through this list, I think it could be really overwhelming. So looking for how you break it apart kind of piece by piece so that if you're looking for ways to advocate, that you provide real actionable items that people can identify, relate to, and actually take with them and respond to. So kind of bite-sized pieces that, and some of those strategies would be appropriate for, you know, several of these different areas that were identified.
So we want to come away with some action items, some steps, some possible,
really concrete things that you can take with you.
Definitely.
Strategies, I would add strategies.
Definitely. Anyone else? Common themes or ideas? Smell the wood burning. So while you're thinking further, because I need a little more from that, just this concept, I think this is a good approach to potential learning communities, being that we could probably come up with action items and strategies from a general perspective that could be translated into the specific needs of advocacy. So that's a big piece for me. I think we have something from online. Fairfield? All right, Fairfield.
All right, let's see, so
Fairfield.
Speak up.
Go ahead.
Okay.
We can
So
hear you loud and clear.
Oh, good. So here in Fairfield, I'm thinking that the partnerships that we develop, this is not work that just one agency can do, but the fact that we can draw upon our partnerships, maybe with housing agencies, domestic violence agencies, food banks, you know, however, whatever we need in the community to strengthen the work that we're doing with families. So partnerships, I think, is a strategy.
So basically bringing people together from the various sectors that serve our families and our communities to be able to talk about what aspect of the problem solving or advocacy that they could be responsible for?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would also like to add that when these agencies get together, being really explicit about what resources they offer the community so that we would have a better understanding of who to turn to in times of need and getting our families the resources that they need. So just, again, being very explicit about what each agency offers to the community.
Definitely. So we have someone in the room in the hub. You had something else?
So I think a lot of the common themes that I noticed from the list that was generated are all around like concrete supports in times of need and, you know, trauma-informed care and ACEs and sort of like prevention, education, and advocacy. So a lot of that can be grouped together.
So let me check that off. Can you give me that one more time, those three things you said?
So concrete support in times of need, I mean, that covers hunger, covers housing, homelessness, it covers access to health care, and obviously doing, you know, looking at that from a lens of equity, I think would be important. You know, childcare, I don't know if I mentioned that one. So from what I can see from back here, that kind of looks like they could be grouped together.
Okay, that education piece.
And then ACEs and trauma-informed care and resilience, those go together.
Starting to be.
Yeah, and you can even put prevention, education, and advocacy with that as well, with ACEs and trauma.
Here. Trust me, when I break all this down and send it back to you, it'll look much clearer. Promise you. I know what I mean. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Berta Perez Sanchez. I would say somewhere where maybe an action item or strategy, having the staff that are providing a holistic approach, providing services, so a holistic approach, more wraparound services, being informed of what resources are out there. I think that that's something that is needed.
So kind of what our Fairfield folks were saying, just this broader understanding of what's out there. You know,
I also heard you say common approach and
Mhm.
kind of falling into that common, holistic approach. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to add so that ACEs, prevention, concrete supports in times of need, and equity, peace, kind of start to create this umbrella that hopefully throughout the day and towards the end of the day, we'll begin to start to wrap into this. So one of the things that we're talking about here is the individual advocacy versus our community advocacy. So, and we kind of started this conversation earlier when we were talking about the lobbying piece. The fact that that individual advocacy is just this, that holistic aspect of service provision and how we help folks access services versus that community or the policy or the issue advocacy. So we're going to start to break that down in our understanding of what these needs are that we've put out here. So what I'm going to do from here on is to give you food for thought for our final exercise. And our final exercise is going to be our planning, our actual planning. We are going to come up with today what the next learning communities look like. And it may be from a general sense, and then you get something from me or from Lana or from our group. They ask you for some feedback so that we can come up, because the next learning community is going to be August 28th. And we're going to come up with how we begin the process of building from that learning community to the next, to the next, to the next. So this is where you guys were stealing my thunder, right? Because I don't know how many of you are familiar with some of the new research, and I just want to pull something out to make sure I don't miss it. So Ellis and Dietz are public health researchers, and they began to look at this whole ACEs thing that we're talking about, because what we've realized is everyone experiences trauma, right? At some level, varying degrees. Everyone has something, and your trauma may not be my trauma. You may have experienced something that wouldn't have affected me and me as well to you, right? So we realize that these adverse childhood experiences affect this process. How many of the things are on this tree that we've talked about over here already? The fact, and this is our research that goes beyond it. This is to let us know we're smart. Our maternal depression, our homelessness, our domestic violence, the substance abuse piece. So if we look at it, the trees are the outcomes. You know, we know that these ACEs outcomes begin to affect us, and the leaves on the tree represent that well-being, that or lack thereof. And the branches represent the experiences, how we get to those outcomes, you know, what happened to us. Well, what Ellis and Dietz realized, and we have realized it, but they were able to put it into a process, is what's missing from this tree. So with that, and thank you for those of you who've been to our building community resilience training and saw that and were my plants that helped me out with the roots. Because what they realize is that they're adverse community environments. And if we don't start there, we can't help save the tree. We can't help grow or cultivate or make it healthy again. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the roots, the poverty, discrimination, community disruptions, or the lack of opportunity and economic mobility, that housing piece, violence. So a lot of the things that we're talking about in this prevention model, or when we're talking about ACEs, that's what I want us to keep in mind. So remember, I'm just continuously giving you food for thought for our last exercise. What we're going to talk about, how we farm and cultivate and harvest these ideas that we've come up with to plan our future learning community. Any questions so far? So what I also want to bring to your attention is one of your handouts that goes along with this. So San Diego State University is one of our partners, and through some of the research, they've put together this knowledge to action brief. And it basically starts to talk about this pair of ACEs and how it works. But what I want to bring to your attention and what we're talking about today, and this was put out long ago, so this again supports what we're doing. If you look down under the take action, it says start building community resilience. Because that's what we're talking about. Would everyone agree that the foundation to beginning to improve these concerns and situations, the foundation is building resilience? And not only building resilience in the individual, but we realize we have to build it in the community. Because in many cases, I know, remember, why do I do what I do? Some of the things that I miss. I built a lot of individual resiliency. Worked really hard with youth in foster care. And then you know what I did? Plopped them right back into the community. And hadn't taken the time to prepare them for that, or even be a part of rebuilding or reassessing or improving that community piece. And what do you think I saw? Many times folks fell off or reverted back to. So that's why this community piece becomes so important. So this is just support of that. And in that taking action, it talks about challenging your organization to explore the systemic issues. So we have to do a dual set of work. And what we believe, and if you stay true to the concept of a learning community, it's bringing us together to talk about these challenges, how we're solving them, what action items we need to begin to develop, what are the strategies, how do we partner, what do our agencies already do? So I need one of you and two of you and one of you and three of you to sit down at the table, because if we keep addressing them in our silos individually, we're not going to solve it. We've got to come together and address it from a community perspective. That make sense? Ooh, I got some I was going to tell you to nod, but I heard them. I got a couple amens. That's good, because that's where we're going to go. That's the bottom line today, is we want to figure out how we do some of these things through the challenges that we've represented. Deal? So here's what Kim's going to do for us next. He's going to take us through some of the data, and obviously we couldn't collect it all. But what we've done is we started to collect some of the data from what our communities, our region says are some of our concerns. And we're also going to talk about the data that was collected in some surveys of folks who've been to these learning communities. So let's welcome Kim back.
Thanks, Troy. I love that tree. I think that's a great metaphor, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is try to say, okay, we all have our opinions and our observations. How much of it is based in actual data, in actual fact? And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I invite you to interrupt me particularly if there's something where it's not quite clear, and you want to be clear, you understand what that data point is. And I'll just address it really quickly. I will also offer myself up during the lunch hour. I did bring all the source documents with me, so if anybody's really puzzled about a particular thing, we can have a conversation during lunch about it. But basically what I'm giving you is some more food for thought for the exercise this afternoon. I looked at three different data sources, I guess would be the way to put it. Many of you probably participated in that survey that we sent out, the Survey Monkey, that said, what are some of the main interests that you have, and what are some of the main methodologies that you're interested in pursuing, under the strategies umbrella? And I'll report on that first, and then we looked out. Thank you to everybody in Fairfield. They did a survey of youth recently in Solano County, over 700 youth, and I'm going to share a little information about what came out of that survey so that we have the youth perspective. Granted, it's one county, but it's one of the larger counties in our region. And you guys can see if you think it matches up with what youth might say in your own communities. And then we'll go into like kids data type stuff, you know, what's the population and that kind of stuff. So that we're grounded in some facts and we can see what the resonance is between what we've already talked about and what the actual data is. I will say that I felt like you guys were channeling my data when you were talking about the issues that were impacting your community. So I think you're going to see that there's a lot of alignment. So, okay. When we did the survey, one of the questions we asked was, what are the issue areas that that you think are important for strategies to take on or to take a deeper look at? And the first and second were very close. Every time I went and checked the survey for the new reports, one or the other of these two was in first place. At the very end, trauma-informed practice and the 5 protective factors was something that people felt the most strongly. Right behind it was housing affordability and homelessness, and we've just been talking about both of those this morning. And then third, which kind of fits right in, is the amelioration of poverty. And although fewer people made this their first selection, a lot of people made it as their second most important choice. So there were several other things on the survey, but these were the 3 that were fairly strong, with trauma-informed practice being the strongest. We also asked what kinds of tools or approaches, what ways would you like to think about addressing, what tools can we use to address these issues that you're citing as important. And the top 3 were developing parent and community engagement skills, improving capacity for state and local advocacy, and the need for common data collection. So again, we're just echoing what we have already said this morning. And then jumping in, I'm going to go through it fast, but stop me if there's a question. Because I'm thinking people want to get to lunch. So, I don't want to hold back the starving troops. So we did this survey, as I mentioned, in Solano was over 700 youth in Solano County, throughout the county. And, oops, sorry. There we go. Here's the results of that survey. I mean, there's more to it, obviously, but the 2 things that came out as the biggest concerns for youth that were interviewed in Solano were bullying and substance abuse. And 78% of the youth surveyed said that this was a problem, bullying was a problem, and 290, I think there were about 500 that actually answered this question, but 290 of these youth said they personally had been bullied. Substance abuse was similar kinds of numbers. 81% of the respondents said this was a problem, and 183 youth admitted to having used drugs and or alcohol themselves. So that's just in a nutshell, a youth perspective, what youth themselves are identifying as key issues in their groups. Okay, moving on to basic data. Here I just started pulling things out of the kids data website that probably most of you are familiar with. And the region that we are in, the capital region, is Butte, Colusa, Lake, Placer, Sacramento, Solano, Yolo, Sutter, and Yuba. That's our region. So the first thing we looked at was just how many kids are in each community, and that's, you can see here before you. Colusa has the fewest with 6,200, and I can't even read my own. Sorry, is it 86 or 06? It's so tiny. I need new glasses. Moving all the way up to Sacramento, that has over 350,000 kids. So very, very different counties. I mean, we're adjacent to each other, but in terms of the size of the population, very, very different counties. Also, the child population, we looked at what percent of the total population in that county was children. So this is not as, all over the place of a range as the first slide. The high was in Yuba County, where 29% of the kids are, or 29% of the total population are children. And the smallest percentage was in Butte, where almost 20% of the total population are children. So it's a range, but it's not a huge range. We've all got, pretty close to a quarter, and sometimes more closer to 30% of our kids. Yes. Children are defined 0 to 18 in these numbers. Not okay. Then we took a look at the ethnicity of the population, and I'm trying to remember. Okay, so you said this was not in the printed one, right? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to show you some pie charts on this, because it's kind of dramatic. But my understanding is they're not in the handout that you have. But the bottom line, the information that's in those pie charts is summarized here, and that is that the majority of children in California and in Colusa County are Hispanic. So over 50% of the children in California now are Hispanic. I didn't know it had gotten that big that fast. So, and that we have one county that follows that model to the T, and that's Colusa. In Solano, Sutter, and Yolo, we are predominantly Hispanic. So what we mean by that is Hispanic hasn't hit 50% yet, but it's the biggest single group. So an example would be 40% of the population is Hispanic, 20% white, 20% Asian, 20% Black. That would be an example of the preponderance of the kids being a particular minority status. But it's not in those three counties. They're not the majority. They're not over 50%. In Butte, Laker, and Placer, we have a majority of white, and in Sacramento and Yuba, it's predominantly white. So again, not 50%, but the white population of children is greater than any other single ethnic group. Also worth noting is that Asian children exceed 10% of the total in Sacramento, Solano, and Sutter, and African American children exceed 10% in Sacramento and Solano. So here's where you can see it graphically represented. It's a little bit tiny. That's probably why they left it out, right? But it's just interesting. You can tell by looking at, look at that first one is Colusa County. The gray area is huge compared to, say, Sutter County. Is that Sutter? Yeah, at the bottom corner. So at bottom right corner. So I'm just going to flip through these so you can get a sense of how it looks graphically, the information I just gave you. Okay, and let's go on to child poverty. This is a fairly significant range. The county with the lowest child poverty rate is Placer. This is in our region, and the highest is Sacramento. Its highest, is Lake. Just as points of comparison, since Sacramento has so many more kids and so many more people than the other counties, Sacramento County's numbers is 24.7% of the kids are in poverty, so a quarter of our kids. And for the state as a whole, as a kind of benchmarking thing, 21.9% of the kids are below the federal poverty line. So I think the takeaway for me on this is, even if it's only 10.2%, it's still way too high, and so even in comparably good economic times and in a county that's wealthy compared to other counties in our region, we still have a 10% federal child poverty rate. We still have way too much child poverty in Placer County, that where we're seeing the 10%. That's still 8,400 children in that one county that are living at a poverty level. Single parent households, it's important to note the way this is reported in kids data is for female heads of households tend to have more economic adversity than a male head of household, so they just reported on the single female head of households. And again, we have 4 of our counties that have a rate that's higher than the statewide average, and that's Butte at 21%, Lake at 21%, Sacramento at 21%, and Solano at almost 22%. So, I mean, this is why I was saying I felt like we were channeling each other, because homelessness is one of the things another thing that I looked at. This is kids that are in school. That's the tracking mechanism, and where the school is aware that the family is homeless. And I know that tends to underreport how many kids are actually homeless, and it doesn't capture kids 0 to 5. But it's a snapshot of what's going on. I think what's very concerning is what's going on in Lake, where 10% of the kids are known to be homeless. That may be somewhat related to the disasters they've had in that county. Yeah. So maybe there's just not housing stock available. But anyway, it's alarming to see that many kids homeless. But we have the issue everywhere. There is not a county that doesn't have a challenge in trying to figure out how to make sure that kids are not homeless. Butte is 4.6% of the child population, Colusa 1.5%, as I said, Lake is 10%, Placer is 2.7%, Sacramento is 4.5%, Solano is 2.5%, Sutter is 1.7%, Yolo is 3.3%, and Yuba is 2.2%. On infant health, so I keep forgetting to click, sorry you guys. On infant health, 9.4% of Lake County infants are born preterm. And the statewide average is 8.8. All of the other counties in our region are at 9.4 or below. So the only county that is, and you can see what the adversity is there with the poverty numbers that we've already seen and the homeless numbers we've already seen. You know, and no doubt that links to why there is a high percentage of Lake County infants that are born preterm. But we do see preterm infants in every one of our counties, so none of us have escaped that issue. Child abuse support, these rates are the percentage of percentage of children who have had abuse reports made on them as a this is how I'm saying this so backwards. Okay, first of all, it's child abuse reports, not substantiations, for those of you that sort it along those lines. And secondly, this is the rate per 1,000 children. So statewide, the rate per 1,000 children is 55. And in our county, we have a lot of counties that are above that rate. I'll read them out really quickly, even though you can see them. Butte is at 70.5. Lake is at 97.7. Sacramento is at 57.3. Solano is at 57.6. Yuba is at 61.8. Colusa is at 37.8. Placer is at 39.1. Sutter is at 43.4, and Yolo is at 49.3. So a lot more child abuse is happening than we would like to see. Those of you who are familiar with this data set, which originally is that data set that Berkeley keeps, I always feel a little bit cautious about using reports because most of those reports are not going to be substantiated. But often what we found, and I think most of you know, I was, my organization coordinated the FRCs in Solano for, almost 20 years. What we found is that a lot of the families who are getting reports made on them that are not substantiated are ideal to be served by a family resource center. They have stresses, they have issues that they're trying to deal with, and they need help, and it's just not reaching the level of something that would be considered a substantiation. So I think this is a good number for us to look at when we're trying to think in terms of prevention. Okay, so moving right along. Oh, okay. So this is seventh graders who report being bullied at school. Statewide, 39.4% of seventh graders report that they have been bullied at school. 2 counties in our region did not report, so we don't know what's going on there. That's in Placer and in Lake. But in the other counties, Colusa reports 29.5% of their seventh graders report being bullied. And all of our remaining counties in the region report an incidence that's higher than the statewide average, ranging from 39.5 in Yolo to 48.4 in Yuba. Kind of scary, actually. I think it was just self-identified. So if they felt they had been bullied, they reported. And I know for the 11th graders using drug and alcohol, it is self-reports. So statewide, 33.4% of 11th graders have used drugs or alcohol in the past month. This isn't an ever statistic. This is in the past month statistic. In our region, Placer did not report, but Sacramento, Solano, and Yuba were under the statewide average, but Butte, Colusa, Lake, Sutter, and Yolo all had rates that were exceeding the statewide average. That's a lot going on in just the past month. So that's it. I crammed a lot of data in really quick. What surprises you about that? Was there anything that you were like, whoa, I didn't realize that? What surprises you about the data we just covered? Okay. Yes.
So I was really struck by the child abuse report data in particular because as you started talking about, contextualizing it and saying that many of these reports are not necessarily going to be substantiated, but these are high-risk families. And one of the things, in having lots of conversations with folks who are working with foster youth, one of the big concerns is that up until the point where a child is removed from a home, there are so many resources that just cannot be deployed for families. But then we can roll out, the gold carpet as soon as a child is removed from a home, which those of us doing ACEs work know, we've just added to, their lifetime risk of having a whole host of other, behavioral and physical and mental health outcomes. So it'd be really great for us to be able to kind of hone in on those families in need because we clearly are seeing whether or not there was substantiated abuse, that we know that there are other risk factors that are happening there, and it'd be great if we could sort of unlock the door to all of those resources that we have for families after, a child has been removed, before the child has been removed, and kind of so echoing what we were talking about in terms of prevention. So those were really the data that kind of stood out to me in terms of this is a place for us to be able to begin our advocacy and really say let's deploy some things there to be able to help those families since we know who they are.
I mean, you're singing my song completely, but I do want to point out because I think some of you are on my email list and some of you aren't, that there is new federal money for at least the home visiting piece of that. So it's federal money. It's coming down to the counties. I think it's federal money. It might be state money. But anyway, it's government money. And it's coming down to the counties, so you need to work with your county in each of those instances. But that's there's definitely a shift in the understanding of the need for earlier intervention and prevention activities associated with that money, which is substantial. And as the planning for that is happening now, that money's starting to roll out. So, like, call up your director of child welfare services and find out what's going on. How it works. Ah, thanks for correcting me.
So this is a pretty amazing data set, and I'm wondering if you are working with anybody to sort of troll through it a little bit further, and you can do things like multiple regressions, covariating out county. There's a lot of further analysis that you could do to kind of look at what factors predict alcohol use, what factors might actually predict being removed from the home, or numbers of reports per individual. There's kind of a whole host of further analysis that could be done beyond the qualitative reporting of each category. I'm wondering if anybody's doing that.
Not right now, but that if that emerges as something that we want in a future session, that can be done. Other questions, observations, anything else that surprised you? Is there anything that you didn't know before that was completely new? You're all. Yes.
So I raised the bullying part without having any stats in mind, and so I'm surprised to see some of the stats here reflected and quite high, to be honest. So it's triggering me to even think further because these were 7th graders. So I'm wondering what are the percentages for younger, those that are in elementary, and what prevention can it be done in order to reduce, getting to 7th grade and then looking at it and seeing these high numbers, percentages. So prevention, I think it's one of the things that comes into mind. Just being able to educate. I mean, obviously, children are being educated on what that is, and they're self-identifying as going through bullying. But what measures can be done to further prevent actually from happening?
Okay, so Troy's captured that, so we can make that part of this afternoon's conversation as well. Are there things that this data supports that you see a direct connection to the work that you're currently doing?
I think that this data maybe is not terribly surprising for people in this room because of the kind of work we do. I think it might be surprising for other people, going back to that notion of advocacy. But I think the important thing is not that ain't it awful. The important thing is there are evidence-based practices that have mitigated or prevented all of these statistics when applied, and they are not being applied to scope. And that's a really important piece of information, I think, for us to say as the advocates, not just ain't it awful, but this is really bad and we can do something about it. And oh, by the way, if we don't, here are the consequences.
I just think that that's spot on. And we have wonderful programs working in some counties or some areas of some counties. But what we could do is bring those to scale across the whole region. I think that should be our goal, is to take those evidence-based practices, working with First Five and other funding, and try to bring those programs to scale whenever possible.
Is there an advocacy component to that, do you think? And a lot of these kids aren't under the age of 5 anymore either. So any other last minute observations? Anything else you want to make sure we get up there on Troy's charting before we
just
break?
Just as far as, because we're going to go a little deeper into the data after lunch, so anything that surprised you or new?
So I just want to kind of boil that all down together in that definition of advocacy, because sometimes we think of advocacy as having to have our fists in the air and fighting for something, but advocacy is also education. And I think given the comments that were made,
when we boil it down to that, then we think about, so what do we have to do to educate people? We have to have a common understanding of the issue. We have to have a common language to approach it. So there has to be that effort towards coming together with some kind of agreement about what we're talking about, how we're talking about it, and then what direction we want to go in terms of ameliorating the conditions that we're trying to change.
So just as a closing observation from me, I've given you some data. It was quick and dirty. We didn't dive deeply into any of them. It's just one collection of information, one piece, an assembly of pieces of information to think about in the context of our conversation moving forward. And I would just say that that my own observation, yes? Okay, all right. My own observation is that every bit of this data supports the needs for further work around ACEs. It hit me again, even though I know this and I've known it for 20 years, it hit me again how tragic it is, how many of our kids are growing up in poverty and how many are growing up facing homelessness. So Fairfield had some comments?
Yeah, so we were kind of surprised, or at least some of us were surprised that the number for homeless youth, it seemed really low according to the data. And then another thing that we had questions around the last substance use. Was that something that was pervasive, or was that like a one-time substance use in the last 30 days, substance and alcohol use? So that kind of, we had questions around that as well.
So the first question was on the homelessness numbers, and those are dependent, those are only numbers that are for kids who are in school, in public schools, and where the school is aware of the homelessness, where they, right. And often people don't share that information with the school. Arthur, I think you and I both know that the numbers that get reported in Fairfield are way higher than throughout the rest of the county, and I think that that's probably because there's an FRC on campus who's doing that tabulation and people are more forthcoming. So I definitely think the homeless count is an undercount. I yes. Definitely agree with you on that, but it's the numbers. I'm working with data sets that are publicly, published data sets, and this is from the Department of Education. What was the other one that you had?
Oh, we were talking about substance use. It was more a question about what the data meant in terms of, was it pervasive use or was it one-time use in the last 30 days? Because there's a difference between not using and then somebody has a party and then they go and they get a one-time drunk or one-time high or whatever, and they used in the last 30 days versus someone who gets drunk or high every day.
Right. So this is a survey that looked at a point in time. How many of you have used in the last 30 days? It wasn't something that, and where they went on to say, how many and how many times. And that, I mean, we can ask for that kind of information. We can go dig for it. This is just sort of the first level of data, because I wanted to make sure we had something on the patterns of usage. But it really it ties in with the Children's Network survey of the youth themselves, identifying this as a key issue. So it kind of builds on that.
I just wanted to state also that if we're looking at the survey in Solano County, that 81% of the youth stated that substance abuse was a problem. And then if you go back and look at the number of 11th graders who actually reported using drugs or alcohol, is about 40%. So, I mean, I think that's pretty significant that they're identifying it as a problem. And then the data over here is backing that up, stating that, yeah, about half of our youth today are using drugs or alcohol at least once in the last month, which also leads me to think about, rolling out the opioid toolkit and things like that, which we're designing it to maybe address the adult population, but we also really need to think about our youth and how to let them have access to that resource as well, and how to make it, so they can understand what resources are out there as well, not just for adults, but also for our youth. I think it's all shown pretty explicitly here as well. So that was my.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other observations or questions? Was there anything on the online people that was emailed in? Okay. So guess what, you guys? The next slide is, oh, can I put it up? Okay.
That's right.
The next slide is lunch. And that's it. I believe it's already out on the tables back in the same general area where you, well, a little farther down, but in the same general area out there in the hallway that comes in this room. Troy, do you have, what time do you want people to come?
12. Why don't we come back at 12:15? I'm sorry. All right. So just want to give a brief recap of the morning. Because we started off talking about kind of this whole advocacy effort. And I did this in green, but now I'm going to do some red pieces because these red areas seem to be the overarching heavy hitters. ACEs, resiliency, trauma-informed care, organizational trauma-informed care, both adults and children, paying attention to secondary traumas with regards to our providers, but this whole prevention, concrete supports in times of need, equity, seem to be the threads that went through some of the things that we discussed with the data. So then out of that, we started to talk about these being some of our needs, like what we would want to see in learning communities, action items, and things that developed, and meetings that developed concrete strategies. How do we partner? How do we do things as groups instead of silos? Specific agency and their services, and this is something that probably has to be done on an ongoing basis. This is when we were talking about who does what, where do I send who has an expertise, and then we talked about the holistic approach. So before we dive into these two questions really quickly, one of the things we talked about during break that we're going to also do is it'll be our job as Strategies 2.0 to harvest some of these ideas for you, meaning once we come up with overarching objectives, are there some specifics from these lists that we can begin to develop these things for? Because I think this is our priority, action items and strategies. How do we go about developing action items and strategies around advocacy? I'm going to give you a little more detail about that. But before we go on into that, as far as the data that we talked about earlier, and thinking about our overarching ideas, and I'm going to put those on the chart as well. What does the data kind of support? And does the data and our opportunities, and I think there were some collective nods. I just wanted to jot a few things down from the exercise that we did this morning about our needs. And I heard a little bit of it over here, so we kind of started that because the things that were surprising kind of meet some of those needs here, but I want you to help me to transpose them here. So what does it support? How does it kind of match with our opportunities? And these are kind of one and the same, just said in different ways. How does it match our opportunities, what we've said that we need, and what does it support? The data that we heard about before lunch. No doubt. Mm-hmm.
The child abuse rates per 1,000 indicate, or I should say include, those non-emergency CPS reports that oftentimes refer or turn out to be a referral to a family resource center or other CBOs for services.
Okay.
And that, to me, is a preventative measure that's in place already, but we have to make sure that we're, number one, continuing to serve those families, and number two, continuing to emphasize the importance of the reporting process for mandated reporters and others.
Okay, definitely. So that non-emergency piece, because that kind of leads into our prevention work, back to one of our main points. Anybody else want to add to that? What did our data support? How did it support some of these opportunities that we spoke about? Go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Natalie. You in the back? Oh, I'm sorry. I keep saying, come on, talk, and we're waiting on the microphone. I apologize.
So I think that the data and how it kind of aligns with opportunities, I think if you look at a lot of the data, then what you can do is use that to really decide who your audience is, who you're targeting for your advocacy, and the data just reinforces what that need is. So when you're advocating, you need to decide who your audience is, and you have to tailor your message to them. And I think using this data would be very helpful for that.
Definitely. So who do we target? How do we go about streamlining our efforts? Because we know it's a wide audience, so how do we go about streamlining it, talking about that? No doubt. No doubt.
Do we have somebody over?
Yes, Natalie, and then we'll go over here to Barbara.
Looking at those and looking at the data, I think the homeless piece and drug and alcohol were both called out pretty predominantly in both the data and what we talked about with all the check marks.
So those are topics to support what we've already talked about. So we were talking about what does the data support, and it supports the need for the attention to drug and alcohol, so definitely. And then what are our opportunities? So they're kind of one and the same with slight differences. So it definitely supports, so it's the same as the child abuse rates, and we talked about the non-emergency supporting prevention.
Barbara Bassano with Placer County, Kids First, Cap C. And this kind of aligns with what's already been said, and people may be on different spectrums, but really identifying best practices and models and practices and policies that people can jump on board wherever they happen to be to help continue to develop that, which would include some of those initiatives that have been discussed.
Yeah, that goes back to common practices, common approaches, common language to develop some of that regionally.
I'm going to add that here, common language.
Troy.
Oh,
I got
in the back. Thank you for waving. How are you?
Yvonne McQuaid with First 5 Butte, and kind of tagging on to what you were saying about best practices. There's this data, and then I think it's important that we connect it with data of hope and what's working. I'm just really struck by the sense of despair these days for everybody. And, I'm looking at this, and somebody, I think the gentleman over here said, you can get overwhelmed with how bad things are. And yet there are some answers out there. There's some things somebody mentioned this morning, great things that are happening in our communities. And so how do we say, here's the trajectory we're on, this is not looking good, but here are possibilities and pieces of hope that can start to change that trajectory.
So I like that. We're going to coin that. We're going to put that on a T-shirt, hope data. Because I have a mentor that's holding a microphone over here that constantly tells me you got to stay strengths-based. Because we spend so much time steeped in the trauma, the drama, the ills, that we got to come from it from a resiliency model. All right?
So I'll take that as a little cue to add to kind of a statewide perspective of what's happening in the learning communities and some of what has happened here through the last year, and that is through the identification of a particular topic area, highlighting what's happening in different parts of that community, people, practitioners coming and highlighting their work, collaborators coming and presenting what they're doing together and how they do that together, advocates coming and talking about their practice for advocacy, and then the learning community participants saying, so what is it we can take from that? And Gail, you're presenting on Thursday in the Sierra region. Gail Kennedy from the ACES Connection will be presenting, and along with a practitioner in the region who is utilizing the ACES Connection for advocacy and collaboration in their area. So those are the kinds of possibilities. I just kind of want to open some thinking up for all of you. I'm not saying that's what has to happen here, but once there's some agreement about what you want to pursue, what that topic areas you want to pursue, and maybe the topic areas, different ways to do advocacy, you know, so we're still open to possibilities here, but just to kind of give you a little vision, do a little vision casting with you about some of the possibilities and some things that have happened in other regions in the state.
To tag on to that, just one of the things I heard from that is celebrate. A lot of, celebrate our successes, I think, because a lot of things can get overwhelming, but if we recognize what we do achieve, and then second to that, and it's a story Mike tells on outreach, it's the starfish story, which a lot of you may have heard. And this was actually asked to me in one of the outreaches. They said, it's all overwhelming. How can you do anything? And I said, well, it's like the starfishes. There's a lot of them that wash up from the ocean on the beach. But, the guy was walking by and throwing one, every few feet into the ocean. And he goes, I helped that one. So, no, even though we're not, little by little, we're helping people and making a difference.
I think that's such an important concept. One of the things when I'm training on trauma-informed care, we talk about secondary trauma. We talk about the adverse effects it has on us, because at times there's so many more failures and successes in what we do. There's so much fallback and slide back, and okay, we got this far, but then this obstacle jumped in the way, and then we do celebrate those small successes, but we got to remember those to celebrate them big, and that's a big piece to that. I appreciate you. Carolyn?
When I saw this data, the sentence that came to my mind was, Houston, we've got a problem. And one of the data shows us that we have a great case for stating our problem, and that it's not anything we've made up. It's not fictional. We have the numbers that show that we have a problem with homeless for our children in all of these different areas, and we can prove it.
So we need to make sure we continuously use our quantitative and qualitative data as proof. Funding proof, practice proof, policies, procedures, how we go about doing this. So here's where, go ahead.
I'm saying to this crowd, and I know everybody knows this, but to me, another thing that the data was pointing at is that we really need to get early prevention as early as possible, because a lot of those other, like the drugs and alcohol and even homeless, like the more we can prevent the front end, then we're gonna deal, what's the root causes here? Then earlier the better.
And I'm going to throw in one more thought about kind of the both and that's we have a problem, but we also have assets, right? So, which is why when I talk to Troy about trauma and resilience, so that we always have to look at both. Neither one of them is going to help us deal with the challenges that we face. And the other is the individual and the community. So we also go upriver and see why those starfish are popping out. You know, we help one at a time, but we also go up and try to solve the larger root cause problem to see why that condition is happening in the first place and what we can do about that condition, as well as at the same time helping folks who are affected by it.
So with that, I know what lunch looks like or after lunch looks like. So we're going to do some thinking and some conversing. But before we do, what opportunities have been identified that we can put the most energy to? And what I mean by energy is what makes you come back and bring a friend 4 times? What makes you come back or say, I can't make it, but I need to send somebody? What's going to make you come back 4 times? That's my ask. It's real simple. What's going to make you come to 4 learning communities? And it starts with this list. So the specific housing, homeless, education piece, but we have some overarching ideas that have come out, right? We talked about starting with prevention. So what I want you to just think about now, start thinking now. I'm going to give you some more food for thought. What makes you come back? Troy, these 2 things would make me come back. So start thinking about that as we talk about the reminder of individual advocacy versus community advocacy. We're going to start to talk about the community piece. And we're also going to remember that from our previous learning communities, these were 2 things that came out as well. So it's a pervasive theme: parent and community engagement, state and local advocacy. So we're getting a theme. We just got to figure out how to answer it. What's going to make you come back and bring somebody? One of the things that goes along with advocacy are the activities. Remember I mentioned earlier about the advocacy over common, or the practice or the process of coming up with common language and common messaging and common practice, but there's also the issue advocacy. They're kind of different with different tenets. And as far as advocacy in general, these are some of the activities that we can start to go into. Again, I'm giving you food for thought because I got a big ask as our closing, all right? A big ask. So these are some of the activities, and I got this information from a report that was put together by somebody that I know pretty well for Sparks' point around their efforts around advocacy. So here are the activities that can go into it, some research and analysis. So we did that, like we didn't even like really scrape the iceberg, but we kind of touched the iceberg with our data today. And then there's the community organization. How do we mobilize? How do we get out there and get people involved? The partnering. That's on the second one on our list up over here as far as some of the items we want this learning community to meet. And what type of messaging, common language, are we going to begin to develop within our advocacy? So these are the action items. Do we involve media? Whether it's social media, print media, is there some way we have to start to mobilize that aspect of advocacy? And then influencing decision makers. We have our folks here involved in many different aspects, and it oftentimes feeds into the work of CFRA. Everybody familiar with CFRA? No? You might want to tell them about it before I do? Anybody know anything about CFRA that they want to tell us? Stop nodding, Barbara, because I'm going to call on you. Go ahead, tell us. Take a microphone. Because I could tell you, but I need somebody that's feet deep, ankle deep, waist deep in it.
CFRA is the California Family Resource Association, and they advocate for best practices within family resource centers. They advocate with the state and local legislative and policy makers on things, laws that affect all of us. And then they also bring things to our attention that maybe we hadn't heard about, whether it's local, regional, or statewide policy, as well as training opportunities as well.
Couldn't have done it better myself. See, I'm only as good as my team. But it's an opportunity for some of this advocacy work to further move along the continuum. And it's about to have a resurgence because, you know, there are organizations that kind of ebb and flow, and there was a ebb going on, or was it the flow? Is the flow down and the ebb's up? You know, but there's some resurgence going on. We're bringing it back to life. Strategies 2.0 is a part of that. We're going to be weaving in things like the Vehicles for Change model. If you're not aware of that, that's a whole nother training, but stay tuned because you guys are coming back, right? Yes, you're coming back. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. So these are the activities we want to think about. In using this learning community, how can some of these activities be enhanced? What do you need? All right. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is this is what we're talking about. We've identified the opportunities. That's this. We started to apply these activities that we started to talk about. So this list of activities, here's our list. We started a list of activities, and I ask if anyone needs to add because we're going to put this to paper, and then we're going to reconnect with you to continue to harvest the ideas about how this works. It's all in an effort to build resiliency. Would you all agree that at the foundation of change for our families, for ourselves, the resiliency model has to be a part of the process? To change some of these ills, to make people want to celebrate resiliency is what we're going to build. So there's a model, and we have some more information. You can look this up. But the Post-Carbon Institute, you should have a handout. The handout looks like this. So if you could take that out for me. So in us talking about what our next steps are, one of the models that we've begun to put out with regards to developing resiliency comes from the Post-Carbon Institute. And it says these 6 foundations are a part of developing resiliency within a community. So building community resiliency, if we come through this lens, so I've given you a couple of lenses today, right? Giving you the lens of advocacy activities, right? What does it look like? We've kind of defined advocacy and what we're going to do with it. So this lens is how we lead up to resiliency. And it talks about each of these foundations with the people, and you have a definition of them, but I'll basically give it the people within your community. How do we connect with them? How do we continue to stop working in silos? And we're a community. Systems thinking. How does the system that you're in work? What's the process? The ability to simultaneously see the parts that lead up to the whole. Is the community adaptable? And how do we teach adaptability? That's the change. That's the development. Can it transform? Can it change? Because remember, this is the hardest work. We may be in a place that can't change right now. And we've got to be aware of that. Where are they on the continuum of change? Are they ready? Do we have the right people? Do we know how the system works? Can we sustain it? How many times have we seen a process or projects start that doesn't continue. And then you got to be courageous. Sometimes you're going to have to step into realms that make us uncomfortable, or get our parent partners to step into realms that makes them feel uncomfortable. So looking through the lens of this community resilient model of we need to understand the people, we need to delve into the system thinking. Can we teach adaptability? Is it transformable? Can we sustain it? Do we have the courageous energy to do it? Yeah. It's the Post-Carbon Institute, POSTCARBON Institute. And I do apologize because I had a tagline on there, but it didn't fit. It was covering up the logo, so I deleted it. I'll tell you. There's a resource list that we have for the Building Community Resiliency Training. You can either wait for me to send it to you, which I will through this process. You could also attend the Building Community Resiliency half-day training that's given by Strategies 2.0. Just another shameless plug. It supports this stuff. Post-Carbon Institute, there's a brief that they have about this, really, really interesting. So it helps to build this. But what you have there are the definitions as a benchmark. So those foundations are a benchmark. How well are we doing this within our community? If we do it well, how do we mirror it? If we're not doing it well, how do we improve it? How do we improve adaptability? How do we get the people more involved? It's a great video that we show in the training about a group of community participants that took their neighborhood back from drug dealers. This was the largest one they spoke about. They had to be courageous. One thing that they did in their community resiliency model is they started having cookouts on their front lawn instead of their backyards. And you guys call them barbecues. I'm from the East Coast. We call them cookouts. But they stopped doing them in the privacy of their 6-foot fences. And they started to do them out front so the drug dealers wouldn't just take over their streets. That's building community resiliency. And that's courageous. So with that, we got a lot of information. We got some data over here. What we talked about previously, where we'd like to go. So I have a question for you. How can we use the learning community convenings to address the opportunities identified? These are our opportunities, right? Our advocacy work in whatever area. What can we do? How can we do this? I know I have one idea because Judy stole my thunder by introducing Gail Kennedy too early. Our ACES Connection group is trying to tear the silos down and build pathways. She agreed to help me build a community for us because we have one for the Northern Learning Community. We have one for the Southern, the Sierra. And what I mean by that is it's a place we can go to figure out what's going on, where we can meet a need. How do we develop this stuff to get rid of the ills? So here's what I need you to do. Critically think. Not easy. This is not going to be an easy task. At your tables, you have a chart and you have some markers. If you want to join another table, certainly you can to make your groups more robust or however you would like. I want you to answer these questions. Our folks online, as well as our folks in Fairfield, I want you to start to talk about, with these things in mind. Now, these are what I would consider our anchors. So if your focus is ACEs with regards to housing and homeless, what can we do? Can we bring in a panel? My thought is we're talking about ACEs and we have someone talk about it from the homeless aspect, from the education aspect, and from the medical model aspect. That sound like a learning community? I'm doing the work for you now. You all are nodding. You see what I'm trying to get you guys to think about? I want to know, and when I say identify specifics, do you already know a speaker? Okay, Nadine Burke Harris, $15,000. We all need Nadine in our life. We know that. I worship at her feet. But do you know somebody else that's a community member, a parent partner, that we could call and say, I need you to be a part of a panel. We're trying to talk about ACEs from a resiliency perspective. Troy will help you develop your script. Here's what I need you to talk about. I want that level of specifics.
May I add something?
Without a doubt. I didn't know none of this stuff till I met you.
So I get to have the statewide perspective because, as some of you know, I am contracted with Strategies to help coordinate the learning communities across the state. So I know what happens in all the regions, and it's very exciting to see the energy in the different places. And one of the things that, as an organization, that we've been trying to move forward with the learning communities is the real understanding that learning communities are different than training. So learning communities are opportunities for like-minded people to come together who want to learn about a topic together and then ultimately have something new emerge from that as a result of everyone working together. So again, some of the things that are in the process, nothing is completed because sometimes it takes more than a year, is developing common language around a topic, developing common messaging. And the way that some of that has happened is that folks have heard from practitioners, from presenters, from experts in certain fields, and then focused on what are we learning from that, and is there a common message that we want to deliver in our region about that particular topic. You've seen some data today. Don't forget about how studying data together can really help something new emerge. So think about that as an outcome, as something that you would want to contribute to that would benefit you in your work and you in your own community, that you could take back from this regional discussion and enhance practice or messages or information or relationships or partnerships or initiatives in your own areas. Okay? I'd like you to write it and write it big so you can see, and we're going to talk about it afterwards. So have at it. I'm going to come around the room. I'm going to circulate the room as well. Let's talk about
Fairfield. Just wanted to let you know that we repositioned the camera so that you can see the themes that have come up that we're talking about, meaning ACEs, resiliency, trauma-informed care, prevention, concrete supports, and equity, as well as in our room, what are the wants, what we want, how do we develop specific action items and strategies? What are the partnerships? How do we develop what the agencies provide? What's a holistic approach? So these are just some of the things that can help guide your conversation. If you have any questions, you can chat them and we'll respond to them. give them 5. All right, let's take about 3 minutes and wrap your conversations up. Get your last ideas down. What we're going to do is have a report out. And yes, you have to come up front. We're a family now, so no one can feel like they can't come talk to us. I'm going to ask you if you have one or more sheets to have someone, or if you need the support of your whole group, to bring it up here and give us just some feedback on what you came up with. And then we're going to start to talk about what this looks like going forward. All right? So who wants to go first? So here, I'll bring this up. Nope.
She's got two.
Here, you can use both.
And you can use
You're
it if
official.
you wouldn't mind.
Of course.
Okay, so we came up with three ideas of things. Oh, I just realized there are 4 learning communities, but we came up with 3 ideas. So I'll go through the ideas and then what we're hoping with results. And what we realized as we were working through it is that any of these ideas can be used for any of the issues, and it would probably be even wonderful if multiple issues were represented in the ideas so that it could apply to a lot of different folks. So, and then we really wanted to clarify, like within an issue, picking one focus area or making it bite-sized, like we talked about, to not overwhelm people. So the first idea is how to recruit other potential partners in our work, and we were talking about faith, business, schools, funders. So how can we help them see the value of the work that we're doing for their purposes, and then who do we need to connect to? So the idea was to have a panel and discussion of people and organizations who have done this kind of recruiting successfully with those groups and how it is that they came about and what they did to get to that point. The second idea is leveraging funds, so working with new and existing partners, and we were again thinking of business and other uncommon or non-traditional partners and what it was they actually did together and how it worked out. And the third idea is getting input of community members and showing them the results and that they made a difference. So the ultimate aim is empowering the people that we're working with, but the idea was to have a panel of organizations and community members who have gotten and used community input in programs. So you could see all of those, you know, you could have that be housing, you could have it be drug and alcohol, you could have it be about equity, whatever it was. But the results and the things that we really wanted to take home, I guess, would be a way to put it, is things like elevator speeches. So we could go out to people and say like, hey, this is what we're about. Tools, so really concrete tools that we can incorporate into our work. So things that we could take back to our organizations, but also issue-based. So if there's a particular tool that could help us with concrete support in times of need or something like that. But to really have something to take home and to show our organization and partners. We would also really love to keep learning what is out there, and that includes resources, programs, and speakers. So having this be a place that all 50 of us can learn about things that we don't know about. And then finally, building relationships with key policymakers and having a common agenda with the whole group. I think that's it, right? And then you're going to talk about that.
And then all of this, we would like to invite you to come and join our Resilient SAC organization and Resilient YOLO. I believe there's some others that are growing, that are building in our community. And we meet once a month. We actually meet on the second Tuesday of the month from 4 to 5:30, which, by the way, is today. So if you're not doing anything at 4 o'clock, which obviously we're not because they're ending at 3.
We're going to get them out of here.
And we're actually having a presentation on trauma-informed care, best practices in trauma-informed care in terms of dealing with racial issues. So you're all welcome to come. We're meeting at the Kiwanis Family House and over by UC Davis Med Center. We'd love to have you join us. And at different times, we've done a lot of these things. We had Assemblymember McCarthy come and speak. We've had different organizations come and tell us what they are doing. We've had presentations on what does it actually mean to be trauma-informed care. So we want to, and how many of you have actually been to a Resilient SAC meeting or a Resilient YOLO meeting? Oh, good. Now, next time I ask this question, I'd like all of you to be raising your hands. That's the goal, right? Okay, so thank you. Next month, what we will be doing is having a networking social gathering. So put it on your calendar a month from now. So thank you.
So another ask, right? To start to begin to create these pathways. What I want you to keep in mind as we go through this is when Strategies 2.0 begins to harvest this, there's going to be the learning community work, but remember I also asked you about work in between. Resilient YOLO, Resilient SAC, that's in between work. But we've got to figure the ways to make it a build. So whatever you're doing in between and we begin to address or talk about in the next meeting, we got to figure out how we're building on it. What's its outcomes or what are its outputs? You know, maybe a group of you is going to get together and develop a where is it? Learn what is out there. Resource fair, resource brown bag lunch. These are the sorts of things. But then we go about promoting it. So I have all of your information. And then I got Gail Kennedy getting ready to develop me an ACES Connection silo, strategies, region. So we begin to put that information out of there. You see how, look, I'm only as good as a team. How many times I've been saying that? You see how I coach her through that? But these are the sorts of ideas, all right? So that's how we're going to begin to harvest them, to put them in categories. Deal? All right, who's next? You can come put yours right up here. Who's next? You can put it right up there.
Right here?
Yep.
So we were more talky than righty, and we kept getting dirty looks because we needed to write some stuff down. So we actually had a lot of the same things in your TV. We wanted to do a deeper dive into data for decision making, maybe looking at the different organizations like Kids Data and Gail, tell us how I'm putting this back up with BM.
The Berkeley Media Studies Group, and some of you want to know, they did up in Northern California.
No, you don't need those.
But in the Berkeley Media Studies, they help message, so help you create messages based on data. So Kids Data does the data piece, and Berkeley Media Studies helps take the data, and then what do you need to tell your policymakers, tell your legislators or your school board based on data.
The next thing we talked about is the return on investment, the messaging. I just said First 5 has done some of the best in terms of child development messaging about read, sing, talk, sing, read. I mean, now everybody talks about brain development, right? But the buy-in, thank you, even though I have a very loud voice. I hear you, Fairfield. So it's the buy-in. We're all here because we bought in, but there's a lot of people that have not bought into this. Why should they care? I always say, I work for Head Start. I need to stop inviting Doris Matsui. We have her vote. Whose vote do I not have to come visit? Right? So who's not at the table, kind of like you guys? And how do we get them there? And if we're not, what is the payoff for them? And then learning from others across the state and across it should be country, not, don't recreate the wheel, and ACES Connection can help us with that. And then also, how do we become trauma-informed organizations? So how do we help our own staff who are out there doing the practical work? And then finally, for all you child development people, plan, do, review. How do we go out? How do we plan it? How do we do it? And then how do we come back to make sure that it worked, and how do we tweak it? So that's what we talked about. Anything else at my table? We're good.
Very nice. So I heard a lot of things there. What stuck out for me is in both of these, we're starting to develop ideas for panels, right? For information sharing, because that's one of the things that we want to be able to do. Bring together a group of people to be able to say, you asked for this, here's the information. We have some folks who've been doing it. We have some folks who are experts. We have some folks who have researched it. And we're going to advertise it through Resilient YOLO, Resilient SAC, and our ACES Connect. You see how this is coming together? So what the hope is that we're going to begin to harvest this information, but we're going to ask you again, so you got to reply. I'm going to get it together and ask you again, would you come? in an email or something, and you're going to tell me yes, regardless of what I put out there. But then you got to get a friend to come. See how this is working? Who's next?
I think we have some common things going on here. So ours is not dissimilar to what's already been provided because we think each of those topic areas need to be addressed and leveraged in our own organizations. And top of all that was fund more FRCs. Okay. So part of that in looking at the parent and community engagement is to really the education of hearing from those with lived or learned experience from their perspective. So there again, you have a panel. But also at the same time, hearing the perspective of the individuals providing the service and how that folds into it, as well as those policy decision makers and their view of that world, because those perspectives all need to come together to make and initiate change. And so part of that would be developing from those perspectives the common language and a coordinated approach, which comes back to the messaging. And then developing that action and the public will, and that may look a little different because the public will to get the parents invested and care. Yeah, I care about this, but why should I make that extra effort? Or the policymakers, or even making change within the FRCs or the service providers, you know, to help, how do we drive that public will? And then also, and I think you've all talked about it too, who are the unexpected allies, partners, and stakeholders that maybe we didn't consider when we made the invite, but may, through this conversation, fall out from that and include them in that ongoing conversation or action or advocacy.
I love it.
And thank you for the beautiful handwriting. It was not mine.
I love it. How do we get the police chief out here?
Take him out
right?
coffee first.
How, yeah. Right? How do we get a legislator here, you know? I was invited by Natalie. Natalie, did I tell you Natalie's the, I'm going to embarrass you again, just so you know. Natalie is like my Harriet Tubman, right? She has led me into so many wonderful places. Like, so this past weekend, we were in Yolo County and we had a cafe. And and it was a cafe with regards to religion and gender and race and ethnicity and culture. And I was like, wow. And then they wanted to know what we do next because I was a table host. I was like, you know what? I know enough people throughout Yolo County that we need the mayor, the police chief, we need the lieutenant governor to come be a table host. That's this sort of stuff, right? That's the things we're going to mimic here, all right? Can you tell I'm getting excited? Who's next? Who has some more?
So our table really focused on the do. So not just the planning, but really taking this question literally, learning community convenings to address the opportunities identified. So using that as a forum to really take an idea that's been successful that an organization has piloted, and then take that idea and really get kind of an overview of what that process was, but then have the folks that are participating in that learning convening, have them be responsible for taking a part of what they learned and actually take that back to their own communities and really work on just seeing how they can adapt that to their own organization. So we're really thinking about having this be really practical. So, you know, when you're talking about the pilot and what worked, you know, having that conversation about well, what were the challenges? What would we want to try differently? And be really specific about what the learning objectives are for taking that piece into your own community, and then being accountable for the outcome of that, and then bringing it back to the next convening and really discussing kind of what you learned from that. And then also, part of that involves making sure everybody kind of has a common understanding of the language that they're using and understand what that means. And then also just looking at not just framing a project or a pilot for your own organization, but looking at resources across different sectors. How a library can work with the school, with social services, with probation. How can you take something that's been implemented and tweak it and refine it? So I kind of think of this as kind of like a makerspace kind of model. We spend a lot of time talking about things, but the implementation is the barrier, it seems. So actually getting your hands dirty, trying something out, learning from the results, and then bringing those findings back, that just makes it a lot more real and accessible.
Very nice. So I like the take back to the, I like it all, but I really like the take back to the learning community piece, this whole pilot program idea, meaning that's the between work, right? That's what we're at, because this has to be a build. It's not, they're not these isolated meetings that we're going to have, and it's just, because that's training. We got that. We'll do that for you. It's free. Fill the room with 25 people, I'm there, This is us talking about, in a think tank manner, how we do better, how we do more, how we have various tools in our toolbox. So we're going to go and do Fairfield. Let's hear from Fairfield and their outputs, and they'll bring back.
The reality star responded out of Cleveland, Ohio.
They're going at it.
Hi guys. So we are going to kind of piggyback off of what the last gentleman just spoke about. We spent a lot of our time focusing on the action. We were trying to think, how can we actually turn the next 4 learning communities over the year into something that we can really accomplish.
Hey, Sarah, could you please speak into the mic just a little bit more?
You walked away from the mic.
And now can you hear me?
Most definitely.
Okay, so we actually decided to choose to focus on homelessness because we had identified that in the morning as something that was really all communities are faced with right now. So we started our conversation with talking about reaching out to legislator to find out who they are working with and who those unexpected stakeholders are again. We also talked about the stakeholders who might have some sort of something to do with the homelessness and housing issue in our communities, such as landlords, and also maybe reaching out to the community members to find out what their qualms might be about having low income or subsidized housing within their communities. We also wanted to ask the community, inform the community, and educate the community about the benefits and or deficits of having low income or subsidized housings within their region, because there might be some pushback from that. As also talking about the stakeholders, if there is an apartment community or a low income or subsidized housing community, the wait lists are about 3 years. So how do we encourage other communities, other apartments to have a portion of their rentals, a portion of their units to be that subsidized? So 80% are full price and maybe 20% are going to be that subsidized. What are the benefits for that stakeholder for running that program within that community? I don't want to. So we also talked about streamlining these services and access to services. This has been a repeated theme from this morning as well. We also identified that when our clients come to us, sometimes they're in crisis. And we thought that this in turn relates to our building community resiliency. This is an adverse community experience when our community members cannot get access to the resources that they need. So another one here in Solano stated that the food truck goes to the schools. They go to the schools at the end of the day and bring food to the kiddos. We talked earlier in the morning how our teachers are identifying the students that are homeless. Well, then the teachers would have a great idea of who to give this food to at the end of the day. Rather than having, food banks that are ran at 10 a.m. where parents can't get to them, or they have to get their kiddos to school or pick their kiddos up. Um, we also talked about targeting services in targeted areas. Erica had mentioned a organization that has clinics that come to 4 specific areas in Solano County, where they offer free cell phones, they offer support with filing paperwork for CalFresh, food stamps, Medi-Cal, all of that, and also health screenings, all that kind of stuff, and they go to the 4 most the 4 areas that are most devastated by homelessness. We've talked about a lot in this short time. We also talked about if folks do have access to internet, they have a program here on Facebook that's called Vallejo Happenings, which talks about resources within the community and when they're going on, the clinics, food banks, food resources for kiddos, all of that. And then we also talked about, going back to the homelessness, about how there are very few shelters within our communities that offer the opportunity for families to stay together. Usually it's the mother and the kiddos, or the mother and 2 kiddos, but usually the husband or the partner, the male partner, isn't allowed to stay in the facility with them. So if we're trying to prevent homelessness, child abuse, neglect, we want that father engagement. Why are we tearing these families apart? We need more shelters that offer the family component. So that all being said, we had created a model for what we wanted the next year to look like. We had thought about potentially at one of our convenings, inviting some stakeholders from the schools, having a superintendent or a school district talk about what's going on with their community, and then also encouraging them and engaging them to participate in these food truck happenings. We also thought about maybe having our next convening the housing resources, having some of these stakeholders come in and explain the benefits of offering subsidized housing, or also I know an agency in Sacramento, SAC Self-Help Housing, they offer transitional housing for folks, and it's typically not a very long wait. We also talked about having another idea, which was a housing model here in Solano County. A self-contained community. It's a community within a community. Having them present maybe here in Solano while we're all in Sacramento about what they offer. They offer daycare, they offer food, they offer transportation to schools, they offer that subsidized housing, and it's all within the same entity. So maybe have a stakeholder come in and explain the benefits and how it's building our community resilience by offering this within these communities. So yeah, that's kind of how we envision the next year going. We kind of took this homelessness topic and we try to break it down into 4 kind of manageable topics that we could find stakeholders in each area that would be able to come and present to us about the benefits of what they're doing. Did you guys want to add anything else? Did I get it pretty good? Okay, awesome. Yeah. Thank you. That's all we have. Sorry, that was a lot.
All right. Thank you, Fairfield. We really appreciate it. And Judy just brought to my attention that those advocacy activities that we talked about, you guys started the community organizing piece, because that's what they were talking about. How do we organize and mobilize our community to begin to address some of these needs? And then what they rolled in was the learning communities. How do we bring these stakeholders to the table to talk to us about how to mobilize our community? All right? Thank you. Good job. Thank you for contributing. Can we have our last group? I'll come up and support you. We can go up here, and I'll hang it up for you. Can you grab the red one?
Okay, so we talked about how we felt that it would be very helpful to establish a speakers bureau for ACEs in order to educate and advocate for systems change. And kind of talking about what that would entail, we would envision that including both people with expertise in ACEs as well as people who have experienced and lived ACEs who are willing to share their stories. And then we also talked about establishing an ACEs 101 train the trainer to create healthier trauma-informed organizations, again, very similar to what others have shared. And
The example for this, you can help me because the person who brought this up is gone now, but she shared that in their county that they have a group from various sectors. It's a work group that comes together and they kind of share and in kind and kind of cross-pollinate is what she called it. They get together, they're trained, and they go back to their sectors and they do trainings within their organization, and they also help each other out. They co-train. So this was kind of a suggestion that she had. And then the last one was identifying successful trauma-informed community efforts as models for us to look at, or where there have been effective community coalitions that have been put together and built, that those of us who are kind of at the beginning stages of this might be able to look to. Again, somebody else referred to this as well, kind of not reinventing the wheel, but being able to kind of take advantage of what's been done before and that's been effective and successful. Anything else?
So give yourselves a round of applause. So here's where the work starts. And it's not just for me. I'm going to harvest these ideas. So that's the work part for me. And then when we begin to communicate with you, you cannot disappear on me, right? What I'm going to start to ask is, okay, does anybody in our group know a speaker? Does anybody in our group know some successful trauma-informed community efforts, and can they come talk about them? And again, not everybody likes to be up here. This is my personal stage, but I'm willing to help. We have folks that can help. Okay, let me help you craft your story so you can be a part of a panel. Those are the sorts of things that Strategy is willing to help with, to bring these things to light. Because there's a lot of overlap here. Now, there's some specifics that we could begin to tease out. We will not forget any of them. We can't address all of them, right? So we're going to start to address the ones that have severe overlap and then continue this process of looking into each of these areas that have a base in what we talked about earlier around our ACEs, our resiliency, our equity. Give yourselves another round of applause, because this is, so I'm hoping you see the benefit in this. What I'd like to know now, is there any other comments or questions to what we put together? Are there any other concerns or anything you'd like to talk about this process that we developed today? Any feedback? None?
Does everybody know where we're going? Does anybody not know where this is going at this point? I guess that's the question. I just want to make sure that you all have a kind of a picture of what's next and what you're going to hear and how you can become engaged on an ongoing basis.
So people in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Since we're becoming part of a community, will we have access to each other's emails so that when you send out an announcement about all of this, will we be able to talk to each other?
That's a good question. It's probably something that we'll have to ask. You have something to add to that?
If we do want to create a, what did we say? We said Strategies, Capital Region, ACES Connection Community. Then it would be all of us, anybody that's in the, 6, 7 counties that are part of that would be part of that ACES Connection community. And then we can share slides, we can share all your magic work, Troy. And then, Carolyn, you know, because you're active on the Sacramento group, then you can chat with each other, you can private message each other, but then everybody's a part of that community and members of that community. So to connect with each other. If that is of interest, Troy, it sounds like you're saying yes. Yeah. So then I will work with you. That's my work. I'll work with you and we'll get it launched and we'll get all this stuff up there on it.
And so that'll be a means of folks connecting, right? So And that'll be a and if you choose to opt out, like I don't want to join it, fine, but everyone in this room, make sure your information's accurate on our sign-in sheet because you will get this information.
So I think as far as all of this information is Troy's right. He said his work is to really take a look at all of this and see what overlaps, so I wrote down your ideas as they came out, and I came up with about 18 different things. And some of them are going to be similar, so it's going to take a little while to analyze your comments and say, you know, these fit. So this is really what the will of the group is in moving forward. And then I think it would be up to Strategies to send that out to you all and say, is this where you want to go? Is this right? Does this reflect your thinking? And what would come back to you is a plan for next fiscal year for 4 learning communities with ideas and topics to build on what your interest was. And so that's kind of where it's going at the high level picture for the learning community itself. We have Gail's offered a place for communication, and we still need to take all of this information and say, given what you said, this is a proposal for what the next year of the Capital Learning Community is going to look like. Are you in? And if you're not in, what would it take to keep you in? Is that helpful?
She's good, because did you hear her just give me an assignment? So my assignment is to get back to you. My only ask is that you get back to me, right? Because when one of you email me, I'm not as invested as getting back, but I got 50 of you now, right? I need you to get back to me. We need to grow this. We have an opportunity here to come together in a way that can make things happen. And we're change agents, aren't we? That's why we do this. We don't do this because we're going to be millionaires. We do this because we want to change something. Some of us may be trying to get into heaven or however we want to go that route. But we're change agents, and this is an avenue for that. All right? So we have just a few closing slides, but I'm going to ask Kim to come back up here and close us out, and I have a few words before she does so. So, it's a great day, but a sad day. You have to come up here. So I would like to announce that this is Kim's last learning community. She has some efforts like taking care of grandbabies and helping out in those areas of life. I want to thank Kim personally for your support. I want to thank you for your knowledge. I want to thank you for kicking me in the tail every once in a while when I didn't get back to you on an email. I want to thank you for mobilizing this group. We had some power hitters in here today, and we have over time. So, Kim, personally, Strategies 2.0 would like to thank you. This is not goodbye, because you've already offered some things, and I'm going to hold you to. But I'd like to give Kim a round of applause for what she's done for us. It's up to you, because I did that without crying. It came, it's coming.
I didn't know he was going to do that. So, yeah, I mean, that's part of why I moved up here was because it'd be closer to the grandkids. And I had to make sure I leave here by 4 because I'm supposed to pick one of them up today. So, but anyway, the last couple of slides here. Where's the clicker? And now, thanks to Lana, you can actually see the slides. Oh, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. So I just want to take a minute to also say thank you to everyone who was involved in making this a successful day. So Sierra House Foundation for this beautiful space that they provided for us. Are you able to hear me okay? Or should I be over here? It's on. Okay. First Five Sacramento for the great lunch. Thank you very much. First Five Solano gave us a great free space in Fairfield in the county office building there. and the Children's Network provided staff for the event in Fairfield. Thank you very much, Arthur. So I just wanted to do those quick thank yous. And I also want to say, do we have evaluations? Okay. So if we can get those passed out, blue sheets. Oh, good. Okay. Please take a few minutes to do that. And I would like to just take, we have a custom, I guess I would say, in strategies of what we call plus delta. I don't know. Do we need to write them down, Troy, or do you? Okay. So just saying what worked for you guys today and what didn't work, or what could get better. Like delta is something you would like to change, right? So, so if you absolutely hate lettuce and you thought the lunch was awful, now's the time to say so. But no, seriously, what worked today? It always helps us if we get some feedback like this to do a better job next time. So if anybody could offer what they think worked today, or what would be a good idea to change in the future, either one. Everything was perfect, right? Just the way it was? Yes. Thank you.
So I really appreciated the group work of coming up with the ideas. I don't know the people at my table. I don't work with them, so it was great to meet some new folks and to hear some of the work that they're doing, and how possibly we could collaborate, and just know the synergy within the room, and hopefully that how things are going to carry on, hopefully throughout the new year.
Thank you. Other comments, other pluses, other deltas? How about Fairfield? Do you have anything? I know you would like to get lunch on time, right? We got there a little late.
I think this was a good facility. Everybody liked being here. I also think that we had a good mix of folks. So I think overall we liked it. Is there anything you? I think everybody's in agreement. So anything deltas? Yeah. So
I think because we were a smaller group, we didn't do too much of the pairing, but the group work here really worked for us. So I think that was definitely a positive for the day.
Yeah, a lot of passion.
Yeah.
Good. Any other comments from Fairfield?
I'm looking around. I don't see anybody wanting to make a comment. So.
Okay, thank you, Fairfield. Any other comments from Sacramento? Yes.
It's a question. I know you're going to be working to figure out what all of these are in terms of recruiting people to come to this in the future. I think it helps to know what the topics and dates are in advance. So if that can happen, I think it can make it. And I think today was definitely, we had enough notice, but I just mean for these next 4, it'd be great to have that too. Thank you. Kim, you did a great job responding to that for this. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. Last chance. So things that went well and things that you would like to change for the future. And this is an opportunity to weigh in on what's coming up. So it's been great comments so far. I think that's it, folks. Thank you all so much for coming, for sticking with us for the whole day. And thank you again for your enthusiastic participation today. See you later, Fairfield.